Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
Hello and welcome to this British Theatre Guide podcast with me, Simon Sladen. Oh yes it is, Panto season is here, and after a year in which very few shows were able to grace our stage, hurrah, we're back, bigger, bolder, better than ever, with productions already taking place across the United Kingdom, and they will do so towards the end of January. Today we've got a very special guest with us, none other than Vikki Stone, award-winning writer, composer, actor and comedian. You may have seen her on television, you may have seen her at the Fringe, heard her musicals, but today we're talking about all things Panto. So welcome very much, Vikki, to the British Theatre Guide podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I want to kick off with your first memory of pantomime. Were you taken to Panto growing up? Is it something that was sort of always a highlight of the year for you?
So I grew up in a town that does not have much professional arts provisions. So the only Panto I went to as a kid was the local Amdram. So that was my first memory of it, which was always great. It was a fantastic thing to go to, but it definitely wasn't something that was a ritual in our house because where we lived didn't actually have much going on. And I think that back then people didn't even travel very much, even to like the next town to go and see something. So yeah, it wasn't something I watched a lot as a kid, actually.
Is it true that your first Panto was your first Panto for Evolution in 2015, or did you do one before that?
I did one before. My Panto was my very first job, so I did one of the rock and roll Pantos at Theatre Clwyd back in 2005 or 6, so something like that. So
many of you listening will know those wonderful shows there at Clwyd, and probably at that time was it Peter Rowe who was...
Yeah, it was Peter Rowe, yeah.
And so these are great shows where not only do the performers sing, dance and act, they also play all the musical instruments as well. And it's astounding watching it because there's also no sheet music in sight, which that must be a challenge. Or does it actually help with the rehearsing process because you're sort of in tune to all of those aspects and when you're playing certain instruments?
Those Pantos have a long rehearsal process because you have got to put things together, and people's musical skills differ in the group. So yeah, it's a jigsaw, I think, putting together a big actor muso show like that. But it was brilliant, and it was fantastic for me as sort of as the first job because I was using all my skills, doing music, doing comedy stuff. It was great.
And what did you play in that, Vikki?
It was a production of Beauty and the Beast, and so I was when Beauty and the Beast is as a panto, there's often two kind of ugly sister types, but not as dames. So I played one of Luxury and Vanity. So there's Beauty, and she has two sisters, Luxury and Vanity, and I can't remember which one I was. But I was one of the two. I have no idea which one I was.
And after that, so Paul and Emily, who run Evolution, had they seen you in that, or was it that you got the casting call and then the magic of Fairy Bow Bells awaited?
Well, so that year I'd done several television appearances as a comedian, and I had fancied doing Panto, actually. It was something I'd wanted to do. I hadn't done it for years, and I fancied doing it. So I actually got in touch with Paul, and he was like, yeah, right, come down, and I auditioned for him, and then he was like, yeah, come and be a fairy.
Amazing. I remember speaking to Paul after seeing your glorious Abanazar at Hammersmith, and the first thing he said to me was, we had her first. We had her back in Shrewsbury. And that's when also I learnt about you had written some lyrics for that show for him, had you?
I've actually written some songs that are in different shows. So I'd written a song that was in that show, and I think he went on to use that in subsequent productions. I also wrote a song for his productions of Snow White, I think maybe the following year, that was at the Marlow. So I've definitely got a song that, and with Paul's shows, they end up doing a few years. So there are some songs floating around the Panto of mine, around the Panto ether.
Did you write the beautiful song that the head dwarf, so Crave, I think was at the Marlow, sang? A very beautiful, tender song in the middle of it, and really bringing that depth of character to what, unfortunately, in many pantomimes, whoever is playing those characters maybe come on for a scene and that's in. If it's not actors, then it's those sort of big head things. Your wonderful lyrical dexterity and wonderful playfulness with language, lends itself so well with pantomime But are there other aspects when you're writing lyrics for a show that have a particular, has already a narrative framework and already has characters that people know? I mean, is there a different way of approaching it, especially blending in with those sort of more pop sound that generally Panto takes its lead from today?
Well, so I wrote, there's an original song that I've written that's in the lyric Hammersmith pantomime, and it's a song that's written for Wishy, which in our show is played by a young woman, and I wrote her as a character. It's very different from Aladdin. Aladdin in our version is a guy that thinks that things can be solved by having lots of new things and stuff, and Wishy, in contrast, is someone that's much more interested in the human aspect of things. And so I wrote this song sort of exploring what she would wish for, and I set it up earlier in the show that it's not just love that the genie can't do. The genie can't help you make friends and can't make people hate you. So the genie doesn't do feelings, and so I set it up that even if Wishy did have the wishes, it wouldn't work because she wants a friend. And then I got this opportunity to write like a really big musical theatre style number in the middle of a show that's got lots of pop tunes which the kids love singing along to. But it was nice to have that contrast where you get to sort of really sort of play with people's emotions in the middle of a panto.
I think what you do so wonderfully in that show with that moment is often, romantic songs are a bit soppy, and we're seeing them sort of less featured in shows now. But this really tugs at the heartstring and evolves that character so that final payoff, which we won't receive, won't reveal what happens at the end, is incredibly tender and also reminds you of the community, the values, the friendship that's within that. But also that pantomime does have a moral compass. And in many ways, I think Wishy sort of is that in that, and is that friend who's always there for you, that's always, reminding you of what things are like, which is really, really, really touching. I wonder if we can go back now to earlier in history at the Lyric, where you've written the show this year, back to 2016, and the glorious character of Abanazar, which I have to say, for me, watching the show, that's a real marker in the history of Panto. That role that you played, firstly, we didn't have as many wonderfully comic roles for female performers. Certainly cross-dressing was very, very rare in terms of female to male cross-dressing. Maybe the only other character we'd see all the time was Jeanette when she was doing Wee Jimmy Cranky, because that's a already existing character. How did that interpretation of the character come about?
Well, it came about, that summer that I got cast in that, I'd done a show for a casting director called Will Burton, who casts the Lyric Hammersmith Panto that year, and I was playing, it was a version of Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was playing Oberon. And so I was, that was the first time I'd played a male character on stage. I really enjoyed it, and Will said to the Lyric team, hear me out, see her. And so they sent me the script and they said, sing whatever song you want. And I saw the script and I was like, okay, fine. And the voice that I do for Abanazar sort of started to emerge when I was having to go at the script at home. And so I decided to sing as my audition song, Don't Rain on My Parade, as Abanazar. I decided to sort of go for the audition and sing, choose what essentially a psychopath would sing as they were, and they would believe that they were brilliant. And so they just went, can you do this please? And I was like, I can.
And we certainly have seen the influence of that. We today on the pantomime stage, much richer notion of female to male to female cross-dressing that's happening, but also reappraisal of the Abanazar role. We're seeing many female Abanazars this season, which is completely unheard of. And of course you played Abanazar also in Worthing, and it was a real marker, I think, for that time. So much so that you then went back and did Fleshcreep.
Yes. It's been interesting going from, so the Lyric is a theatre which does panto, which is very accepting of whatever we want to put in front of it, and it's a very good venue for progressing pantomime as a genre. It was more risky, obviously, for commercial panto producers to put my Abanazar in a show, and there are certain producers that just won't entertain it. They're just like, our audiences won't like that. Sorry, we can't even consider you. I know it's hard to say how I feel about that, because I think that you can put anything in front of an audience. I know that producers might feel like they know what their audiences want, but ultimately Panto does have to change if it's going to keep up with. Well,
and also, you know, what is presented every year, it still has those vestiges from the Victorian period. And, you know, I always think, don't patronise audiences, particularly children, because, you know, as soon as you're grown up, you're not a child anymore. So you can never fully understand the world that young people are growing up in today, and don't patronise within them. I mean, I was speaking to Johnny McKnight, who writes for the Tron and a number of Scottish venues, and they, you know, a couple of years ago had the gay relationship in Mammy Goose. And yes, the venue, I think lots of people around those shows are always quite nervous, but you know, the kids, as soon as they saw the two male characters have that ding moment, started shouting out, you know, kiss him, oh, don't be embarrassed, don't, you know, go for it. That's just that. I mean, don't patronise those people. And I think that's the only way that we'll be able to drive the genre forward, is to go, well, the whole point is that this diversity of practice, which was certainly in place in the Victorian period, that's been standardised now, that needs to shatter. And you certainly are one of those key players that's driving that forward and encouraging others that, look, this is absolutely what audiences love and enjoy, because we will love something a bit different too.
Definitely. I mean, when I was in Aladdin in Worthing, I was really clear about not wanting my Abanazar to at all be a product of the sort of traditional Aladdins visually. I really think that across the industry it must change. We can no longer put white people in inappropriate costumes and put them on posters and think it's okay. And there's been a lot of backlash on Twitter about these things, and venues are changing. And I hope that people can see our production of Aladdin and go, it can be done, and you can still have a great production of Aladdin, but you haven't got anyone in costumes that are 20 years old that really we shouldn't be using anymore. No,
absolutely. And I think it was interesting to see, you know, with your first Abanazar, and even in the show that you've written this year, certain bits of that Abanazar costuming had sort of outer spacey superhero-y thing, and of course the princess in this version you've written also is, you know, absolutely, you know, she reads graphic novels, she's a strong independent woman. And for me, as somebody who sees a lot and writes a lot about pantomime, the notion of magic and expected change is moving in place for this relationship between empowerment and, you know, social responsibility. And I think that really comes through in your Wishy character, but also in Princess Jasmine. So let's move to this year's production at the Lyric. Aladdin as a title, as you said, it is a real challenging one for many reasons. Was it that the Lyric came to you saying, we're that title in the cycle, would you like to write it? Or was it that you'd had discussions about one day perhaps penning a show?
No, it was literally the title in that title in the cycle. I mean, I'm hoping to persuade them to add. They do a cycle of 4 at the Lyric, and I'm trying to persuade them to add another one in to the cycle. I'd actually quite like to. I'd like to do a Peter Pan.
Ooh,
yeah, because it's a panto that I've not been in. I've not done. I think it does make a good panto, but could really do with a bit of shaking up as a panto, and I reckon I could have a good crack at it.
I mean, that would be very exciting, because you know, traditionally or historically, we should say, venues that produce in-house are often a bit more wary of Peter Pan, A, because flying is expensive, but B, because it's not seen by certain traditionalists as part of that canon. I mean, things are absolutely changing. With Greenwich did a sort of Peter Pan, but revisited, as in, you know, Captain Hook came back to life after being frozen in a block of ice and being discovered at the local fish market. And there are lots of fun things you can do about it. UK productions this year are doing another like a Return to Neverland style thing. But it would be amazing to think, because there are also problematic aspects with Barry's stories, you know, representation of certain characters, Wendy, or whether that's the islanders on the Neverland.
Yeah.
And cracking that format of a show that wasn't originally intended to be. But then we need to remind everybody that none of these fairy tales were originally intended to be pantomimes, and we've lost so many of those other crazy titles. Now, I read somewhere that you sort of went back to the source text as part of your research for this. And was that something that was really important to you to go back to source, to honour that original story?
Yeah, well, because obviously, like, I know Aladdin the Panto, I know Aladdin the Disney, and it's one of those shows that I've been in, and I know the beats of it. Like, I know the traditional Panto beats. So I felt like I wanted to check where they'd come from, actually. I wanted to check. And it just so happened that there was a brand new translation out the time that I was researching. And so I felt like that was a good thing to do, to go back to 2001 Arabian Nights, have a read, see what's in there. There was some interesting... one of the inspirations I took from it was that there is unlimited wishes. The 3 wishes is a Disney construct. I wanted the unlimited wishes. And because Aladdin was living in poverty, he wishes for food for ages in the original story. He just keeps wishing for dinner because he can't really see beyond that. So I liked the idea of, so in our version, Aladdin he wishes for Nando's, like he wishes for stuff, and I thought that wishing for the loads of stuff was a good metaphor for sort of our attitude towards consumption things, and thinking that having loads of things will make us a better person.
No, absolutely, and there's a nice little twist on what one might usually find in the cave, which I think a lot of people have a great reaction to. It's a very modern, contemporary take on that. But one of the challenges, of course, working at the moment is that everywhere, budgets are a bit smaller, and the show was due to open last year, but obviously the pandemic meant that many shows couldn't go ahead. Did you have to obviously revisit the script for that topicality, which you just capture so perfectly in this, and we'll talk about that in a bit later. But I mean, did you have to amend the script in terms of what the scope of the budget enabled you to do? Obviously, that topicality stuff, or was it not too bad?
I did, yeah, I did. Well, I mean, one of the ones, and obviously the theatre had to make decisions, not knowing what the situation would be like in 12 months' time. So, at the time that we were discussing what we were going to do this year, there was restrictions that they weren't able to sell to full houses. And I think that lots of venues had to sort of bolster themselves to go, right, if we're still only able to sell at limited capacity, we have to make sure that we're not financially in trouble over it. And so that meant that I had to slim my cast down. So I had to take 2 ensemble members out and 1 principal cast member out. Now, you really need 7 actors to do Aladdin. You really do. In the final scenes, there are 7 characters that need to be on stage. But I thought that I could, there is doubling to be had in Aladdin, because you don't... I remember when I first did it, at the Lyric, the fabulous actress that played the genie, Melinda Paris, she'd be sat in a dressing room. She wouldn't even get dressed until halfway through Act 1. So I was like, well, there's that is definitely someone that needs more to do. So I decided that the Emperor and the genie would be the double. It's just that in the final scene, you do need both. And I was like, how do I get these people off stage? So, all I could do was give the Emperor the runs. That was it. So, not to spoil it, but he just keeps having to go to the toilet.
It is a wonderful moment, though, because you can do all of those gags, but I think you better leave it a bit before you go there. Or where are we looking? Yeah. It's embraced. It's a bit knowing at times. Although I have to say, the magic of pantomime, some of the families around me, right at the end, when everyone sort of goes back to the programme to see who played my favourite roles. The programme is also very playful, and then they were looking at the pictures and going, could it have been the same person? No, it couldn't have been. It couldn't have been. So they didn't even clock, the slight aspects of costume, which other more astute members might have seen. But it also is testament to the performer in that role, who manages to just create these 2 glorious characters.
That's also why I didn't want to give it away in the programme. So the biog for the Emperor is an anagram of her name. And also the biography is really daft, like theatre credits include the nativity play. But we definitely had some reviews where people don't realise. It's like, how can you not realise she comes out in the bow in costume? And people have credited this anagram of her name as playing the Emperor. And I'm like, what?
Well, I think, that's an interesting one, because editorially I know that some people are like, well, you have to put when it says the programme and not to give it away. But that must have been great for you writing, knowing that these 2 characters were going to be there. But that rehearsal period and finding those characters, one that's this buffoonish clown Boris-esque Emperor, and then this really cool beatboxing strong female genie. That's the gift of your writing, to have those strong characters there, but also what a gift of a role for a female performer who, as we said earlier, so frequently that there are very few comedic roles. And actually today, what we're seeing is almost the erasure of women in some shows. There's Cinderella's where there's only Cinderella as the character and she might be only on for a couple of scenes. I mean, that's something that's very close to your heart.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to achieve with the show was plenty of cool stuff to inspire young women and also all young people. But particularly, it's not like I wanted to put like strong women on stage. I just wanted to put some really cool stuff that girls just go, that's cool, I want to be like that. And also, one of the things I wanted to put on stage as well in front of young people was how Aladdin's a bit of a... I'm trying to say this without swearing. Can I swear?
I think you can swear, yes.
So Aladdin's a bit of a dickhead at the beginning. He's not particularly... he's trying to show off too much to Jasmine. And she kind of rejects him a bit. And then eventually he changes and he softens and then she says yes. And I wanted to put that in front of young people because, it's cool because the boys do, people show off and, I wanted to put that kind of relationship. I also wanted just to put an absolutely, banging, brilliantly talented young woman in front of our younger audience. And I saw something a number of years ago. I saw a production of Cinderella where the Buttons was a comic and was a really good comic, and the Cinderella was, I think, straight out of drama school or still at drama school, so she was no more than 19, 20, and the Buttons was probably in his late 50s. And there's a scene where Buttons says that he loves Cinderella and blah, 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 and you just watch it and you go, sorry, but that's not cool. I'm sorry. I don't think that's... I mean, he's in his sort of pajamas and he looks sweet, but I didn't think it was appropriate to put that sort of storyline in front of young minds.
No, and I totally agree with you, and I think that's where this, celebrity in a way often completely explodes any integrity of narratives with certain individuals. I mean, we this year we've got, silver-haired Buttons who, absolutely, it is uncomfortable, and, pantomime has always been something that certainly expresses a culture and community, but also can drive change and can be a source of inspiration, whether that is, as we learn from the Victorian practice, something that we should not be proud of. But it does have that social aspect to really drive forward, as you said, putting people on stage that reflect audiences, that are also good role models within that. And I think you have to really think carefully about that integrity of the narrative and characters, which your show so wonderfully does, to make it believable and bonkers at the same time, because that's one of the joys of that, isn't it? I mean, how can you talk to us a little bit about, for people that haven't seen the show or perhaps seen any of the wonderful images or read any of the writing about it, what is sort of the concept? Because we're not set in China. A lot of those traditional Orientalist, racist productions that we've been talking about, that's been completely thrown out the window. So I wonder if you could just frame it a little bit for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's set in Hammersmith, and it's set in Hammersmith, a sort of fantastical version of Hammersmith Market where all the stalls are pastel colours and, it's all bright and bold design. And our royalty, our emperor and Abanazar are royalty, but Abanazar is the advisor, so he was always very much a kind of Dominic Cummings character, and so his costume is a suit, but it's shiny, it's got a cape, so it's like a Panto version of a politician's outfit.
It's the most wonderful colour, that fuchsia-y, it's just beautiful.
And our emperor isn't in its sort of regal attire. He's more dressed like a politician, but a clown. And your Jasmine, the inspiration for her was that she's more of a sort of Beyonce, Queen of Pop type. She's in a velour tracksuit. She's very cool. So yeah, it's kind of taking what Aladdin could be. We're taking the bones of the story and going, what do we want to present now in 2021? What's great about the lyric, which I know that a lot of other panto companies don't have the benefit of, is that there is maybe a handful of houses around the country which get to design their shows from scratch each year. So lots of panto companies take the same set and it's got to do 4, 5, 10 years, and they don't redesign their costumes. But I really think that many of those companies have to rethink it. They have to. It's not okay to get those costumes out of storage again and put them on people.
I totally agree, and I think the challenge I would always give to certain producers and companies is you need to, on your schedule will be this year we're redoing Aladdin. It doesn't have to be that same mould that you've done before. Most big companies invest in a new show a year, so this is the opportunity, and it's such an affectionate celebration of pantomime and community and diversity. Your show, I think most of the reviews have picked up the first number, which is this amazing rendition of Park Life to Panto, where from the off we're seeing pantomime cows, pies in faces, all those things that we know and love. And so there's absolute acknowledgement of that tradition and that lineage, but also this important aspect and passion for driving it forward in a way that is fresh, vibrant, exciting, and responds to the time. And one of the roles that really does that, and I think is a real moment of change, is your interpretation of Twanky. Often it's a man in a dress, but playing Aladdin's mother. But in the show that you've written, the character's called Dave Twanky, who's very much a man, and it's his choice to wear whatever clothing that he wears.
Yeah. You look at people like Billy Porter and Harry Styles and H from Steps. There are plenty of people who can wear whatever they want regardless of gender. And I love a panto dame, and I know so many brilliant performers that play amazing dames. I just thought it was an opportunity, especially at the Lyric, to slightly deconstruct it and just say, I didn't feel like I wanted to do the sort of mum thing, the sort of maternal aspect of Dame. I thought it was just more fun to give it a go and keep the costumes as big as they would be, but it's Aladdin and Wishy's dad, and that's that. And we don't say anything else about it apart from the only character that questions it, which they would, is the Emperor, and the Emperor says, why are you wearing a dress? And Twanky just says, why are you not wearing a dress? And that's that.
Yeah, that is a wonderful moment in the show, which when I was in, such big cheers of support for Dave Twanky, but also, anger at the Emperor's inability to understand and appreciate, people's own individuality, which, is great. And there's so many moments in the show, particularly relating to the current government, where there's certain lines. The genius of having, the palace or what you want, the villain's evil lair as the briefing room. As soon as that comes down, all of the adults in the audience are absolutely screaming with laughter. And I have to say, I think one of my favourite moments is when the Emperor's bemusing, does it matter that we spent all this money on track and trace and it didn't work? And Abanazar just, loudly proclaims, no, of course not, and then goes off. And so that ability to make panto political, but also light, I think you've got this wonderful light touch, because pantomime has absolutely lost this satirical and political edge that it had previously, and I think there's absolutely a realm for it to be able to do that.
Well, I'm a great fan of gags that go over kids' heads, but I wanted them to all be because of things like knowledge of track and trace and gags that are about the there's a line where Abanazar says, sorry about that detour, I thought 30 minutes was about the right length of time to quickly test my eyesight. That's the sort of gag that goes over kids' heads, rather than something that was maybe more innuendo fueled or anything like that. That's just my preference, and I wanted also to really look into what's happened to us, and certainly things politically politically now it's very easy to get away with some quite terrible things without having to resign. And so that's what I wanted to lay into a bit. Pantomime has always been a living newspaper of the year, and this absolutely is vibrantly alive with all of that. But the attention to detail at the Lyric is always so wonderful. Even the little Henry Hoover in the corner, which then changes in the second act. I think so few people have got that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because in this briefing room, when they released the pictures, there was a blooming Hoover in the corner. And I think that I during previews, I saw someone go, why is there a over. And I just quite like it. I just quite like that. If you, it's a really nuanced bit of gag. It's a bit of detail. If you remember that there was a Hoover in press photos.
Absolutely. And I think that also must be a treat for you as a creative practitioner to be working with such a creative team, you know, from the costume and set and lighting and sound and the production, you know, because we should remind everyone, this is not something that happens in a couple of months. This is, well, I mean, it's probably been, 2 years now because of the pandemic. I mean, what is the usual cycle at the Lyric? About a year and a bit?
It's a year and a bit. Yeah, it's a year and a bit. So this was now, this was now two and a bit years. So yeah, it has been a long time. It has been a long time coming, and obviously there was lots of stuff that when I re-looked at it had to go, and you're like, oh, it's such a shame, you know. But the time has got, it's that sort of thing of going, oh God, that's a sign to the bin, even though it was good. But that's topical. That's topical comedy, and that's what you've got to do if you want to keep things fresh. You have to let things go.
It's a mark of a good writer, because so many shows that I see, you know, across even this year, you know, we're seeing Teletubbies and Tweenies, and even a few years ago I saw Ali G jokes. You know, it just makes the whole thing stale and completely out of touch with the now, with the vibrancy of all of that. I mean, we spoke a bit earlier about this notion of the industry really needing to address some of those inherited discriminatory practices. What would your sort of state of the nation of Panto mood be today? I mean, what reflecting on it, do you think we're in a good position? Do you think it's something that is going to keep going, you know, wonderfully? Where are the pockets of things that you like, for example?
I think that people are starting to change. I think they are, and I think that there is a bit of a sort of trial by Twitter thing going on, which I'm not a massive fan of, because I think it feels a bit pitchforky, but it does make change. You know, there's been a lot of situations where posters have been released for shows and they've gone viral in the theatre community, and people have gone, this is not okay. And actually, in some instances, they've reshot the photographs and changed the costumes. So that means that, unfortunately, you know, it means it does work. With this sort of like examining things that way. But I hope that producers and theatre makers look before they're making decisions, because obviously decisions start to happen now for next year, and, you know, over the next couple of months. I'm hoping that people are looking at their billing, their programming, their casting, and wanting to change things, and looking at their budgets and going, okay, it's time to redesign that, it's time to rethink that. Do we need to set Aladdin in China? No, you don't. To have a Panto, you absolutely don't. So, you know, and if you do want to set it in China, what are you going to do to make sure that that's faithfully represented? I mean, if you're going to make that decision, you need to cast appropriately. So, yeah, I hope that industry wide, people aren't just, the phrase that I think frustrates me is when people just go, it's tradition. And it's like, yeah, but there are lots of things that are tradition that are not cool anymore. So that's not a reason to keep ploughing on.
Yeah, I mean, I think tradition is always used as an excuse for laziness, or not to have to deal with an issue, because it's always been done like this, so we'll just keep on doing it. And actually, I think, you know, pantomime is impossible to a traditional pantomime, if you want to use that term, is impossible to define, because there's so much variety in practice, even between some of those staple narratives. So, you know, you might have certain characters in one and in not another. Does that make it pantomime structures are slightly differently, you know? So I think I always like to think, let's not use that word tradition.
No.
Because
well, I actually managed to reintroduce some traditional panto elements. So the Lyric don't often do set pieces in their pantos. They don't often do those kind of panto set pieces. And I put a ghost gag bench in, because I love that as a bit of business. I think it's really fun. And the people, and when I've done it in commercial pantos, you don't have to teach anyone what to do, because every single member of that cast knows what the rhyme is, knows what the stuff is, and they just get on with it. Whereas I had to kind of talk it through in the room beat by beat, and just trying to make people watch videos and explain what this bit of business, what this set piece is. But once I got to kind of take that set piece, present it in a modern way, and I think it's really fun. And so it is possible to like get those really old school traditional elements in a fresh way.
Yeah, I mean that convention is so loved, and it was a joy seeing everybody join in the last bit when they're all, you know, having to do it again, and a different take on a ghost being the thing to scare them, which also was wonderful. In addition to you placing the Glory, Glory Hammersmith as the song sheet, which I think just worked so well at that point. Because I know in the past it's been at various points, and we've also had an additional song sheet, but it worked wonderfully for this rousing, triumphant conclusion to the show. It seems that there is at the moment this big drive, a new interest and a new generation of practitioners, and I would hope that more companies and venues really are looking out to some of those voices to bring these new insights. If you've got people listening that are thinking about, I really want to get into the industry and either writing like yourself, I mean, what would you say the key things to do are, and what are some of the key ingredients for a good panto?
Well, I think one of the things you should do if you're wanting to write a panto is watch panto. And so it's one of those things where, like, when pantos are on, you can't go and research panto all year round. So, one of the things that I'm going to be doing now is going to watch pantos and watch a mixture of pantos. Watch things that are made in-house. There are several, like the Lyric, and there are several others. Watch those. And then different companies, like different companies of commercial panto do things in slightly different ways. So I try and get round a bit of a mixture, and it gives you a good idea of kind of where things are year on year and what the popular things are. There's always this fear like that if you've thought of something. So something I've put in is the sea shanty that went viral on TikTok. I bet you that's done. I bet you loads of people are doing that. But part of me just thought, let's go for it. And there's no point trying not to be popular, because if stuff is popular, it's popular for a reason. So yeah, but it's good to see what those things are that are popular this year, so that you can maybe slightly avoid them on a subsequent one. So yeah, that would be my advice, is to watch as much panto as you can.
Indeed, and there's plenty out there this year. But of course, do go to see Aladdin at the Lyric Hammersmith, and it's just a wonderful show, a celebration of the genre, a celebration of people and community after 2 really challenging years for us all and the industry, and of course we're still not quite out of that yet. So it's certainly, I think, this year more than ever, pantomime is part of that Christmas ritual that we have. Is a time for us to come together in a way at the moment that obviously we haven't been able to. Vikki, it's been an absolute delight talking to you today. Wonderful to hear your thoughts on panto, and of course your glorious panto career, which is just a small chapter in this wider career. I mean, I saw you at the Fringe a couple of years ago and laughed my head off from beginning to end, and hopefully when we're all back and the Fringe is going at full capacity, we'll see you up there as well, and as well as your other projects that you've got with your musicals. Do you have any little sneak peeks of the future that you can divulge about where we could look out for you next?
I mean, I can't. I've got stuff on. I've got a TV show that I'm working on at the moment, which will be out in the spring, I think, but I can't say anything about it. And then also I've got a musical that's going into development, which I just had a meeting about this morning. But yeah, that's what I can't say about either thing, which is not good.
Well, it's exciting. We should look out for that, and we should also hope that your Peter Pan gets an opportunity to fly onto stage somewhere in the future. Yeah,
no one's commissioned it yet, so if anyone wants to commission it,
right, there's the gauntlet. Come on, everyone.
Finding Peter Pan, get in touch.
That's what we need to see for 2022. Absolutely. Well, Vikki, thank you so very much. Wishing you a wonderful festive period, and thanks to all of our listeners at the British Theatre Guide.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.